Okay, we are live. We're ready. You're on,
Muy
Janet.
buenas noches, queridos amigos. Aquí los saluda Janet Noltenius de Casa de la Cultura El Salvador. And tonight's event is a bilingual event in which Casa de la Cultura is doing this jointly with Calina Editores. And in order to celebrate El Día de la Raza. El Día de la Raza, that for us in Latin America is very important. Here in the US is called Indigenous Peoples Day. It's being celebrated at different days, but for us, el 12 de octubre is el 12 de octubre. And what better way to do this than to have a fantastic book presentation today by Reyes Ramirez from Houston. And the book is El Rey of Gold Teeth. ¿Y qué más salvadoreño que eso? Y con eso yo le paso la palabra a la cofundadora y codirectora de Calina Editores en El Salvador, Lucía de Sola. Adelante, Lucía.
Lucia, you're on mute. You're on mute. There you go. There you go.
There I am. Okay. Good evening, everybody. It's great to be here. Again, my name is Lucia Sola, and I'm from Calina. And it's terrific to be here to welcome and listen to Reyes Ramirez, who has written a spectacular book full of images, language, beautiful language, and a lot of wit. I would love, for me above all, he speaks to the human experience and to decolonization. I thought it's very interesting, these two aspects in his book. I'd like to take this time just to read briefly his biography. Reyes Ramirez, him, is a Houstonian writer, educator, curator, and organizer of Mexican and Salvadoran descent. He authored the short story collection, The Book of Wanderers, 2002, a 2023 Young Lions Fiction Award finalist from University of Arizona Press's Camino del Sol series, and the poetry collection El Rey of Gold Teeth, 2023, from Hub City Press. His latest curatorial project, The Houston Artist Speaks Through Grids, explores the use of grids in contemporary Houston art, literature, history, and politics. And briefly, I will also read my partner's biography, Lito Regalado. Alexandra Lito Regalado is a Salvadoran American author, editor, and translator. Her works include Relinquienda, winner of the National Poetry Series from Beacon Press 2022, and Matria, Black Lawrence Press from 2017. She's co-founding editor of Calina Press and assistant editor at swim.org. Thank you, and I pass on the word to Alex.
Hi, everybody. Also, it's a pleasure to be here. Reyes, I want to tell you that I felt like reading your book was like entering a hall of mirrors or an MC Escher labyrinth. I love how your poems have this mosaic or collage feel. I felt like you were projecting a slideshow to me. They have this really artistic bend to them. I feel like your book is curated almost like an art show. And to be sincere, the poems are not easy. They require work from the reader, in a willingness for us to suspend our reason and appreciate language in a different way. I really liked the playfulness of it, the musicality, and especially your willingness to appreciate. Bottom line, I think your book is full of ceremony, and I really recommend it to everybody. It was amazing, amazing. So tonight we're gonna have the honor of hearing Reyes' poems, and he invited me to read one poem, so I'm just gonna read a little quick one. I chose this one because I I really connected to some of the poems in Reyes' book that talk about family. And as I was saying, that sometimes when we talk about the things that are painful, it's like a claw in the chest, and there is a level of humor, wit, and detail and description that kind of, I don't know, makes it slide a little easier on the page. So my poem is What My Father Taught Me about Black Holes. The ghost of my father haunts me while he is still alive. Thank you, he tells me, but I don't like poetry. His body beneath the sheet, spotlit through gap-toothed shutters. On the bed skirt, yellow arcs, wheels of urine, marks to say, do not go there. Not like the cat that rubs its face to say, this is mine. Our tiny white dog, fox-like, but old and toothless, just a stinking gap of a mouth, lifts his leg daily, so we have to lock the room where my father sleeps. My father, or a pillow beneath that white sheet. The rays of light enter. They have to rest somewhere. When my father says goodbye, he says instead, take it easy. He eases into the bed, takes it, the light falling where it wants. Thank you, Reyes, for inviting me. And now I want to open up the floor to you so we can hear some of your poems.
Awesome. Thank you. I just want to start off by saying that it's an honor to share in this space with y'all. Nomás quiero decir gracias a Kalina Editores y Casa de la Cultura. Y también quiero decir gracias a Willy Palomo, que empezó esta conversación, y que Kalina también they published his book, so get it. It's a classic, love it. Voy a leer en español primeramente y después voy a leer en Spanglish, so to say, y después en inglés. Pero nomás quiero decir que sí, yo puedo hablar español, pero no puedo jugar en español. So I can speak Spanish, but I can't play in Spanish. And, I think the collection deals a lot with, what is kept and what is left behind, what is played with. Y pienso que la colección juega mucho con el lenguaje y qué tenemos palabras para y qué perdimos, lo que perdimos y lo que ganamos entre la experiencia de la vida y entre países y entre, I guess, different journeys. And so, that struggle, I think, is on the page, but I think also that playfulness too. So first, I'm going to read one poem in Spanish entirely. Primeramente voy a leer un poema en español enteramente. En inglés se llama A Gospel of a New America. It's translated by its child. En español, I hope I get this right. I translated all of this well enough. Espero que la traducí bien. Un evangelio de la Nueva América, como traducido por su hijo. 1:1. La botella es sagrada, llena de alcohol y sueños. 1:2. Quita la tapa de la botella. Deséchalo como si fuera una semilla. 1:3. Bebe de la botella como uno consumiría la cura, perro perdido. 1:4. Tu cara se hinchará con rojo. Prueba que eres vivo. 2:1. La botella es sagrada, no como tú, un buque de sangre y preguntas. 2:2. La botella es más sagrada cuando vaciado con tragos desesperadas como la última expiración. 2:3. Cuando la botella está vacío, mira por el cuello mientras que ves a la superficie del océano mientras que te hundes. 3:1. La botella es sagrada, conducto de salvación, en el nombre del muerte y del espíritu sombrado. 3:2. Amor estallido toma años. La botella es barata. 3.3. No estás hecho para amar, solamente renovación. 3.4. Hay tantas botellas como huesos descansando bajo de la piel de la tierra. 3.5. Consume suficientes botellas para llenar cada vena de cada pensamiento. 3.6. Si consumes demasiado de la botella, tus entrañas se derramarán y caerán al suelo con el sonido de un aplauso. 4.1. La botella es sagrada. A través de sus contenidos de alcohol y sueños, no te sentirás el apretón de la eternidad alrededor de tu corazón derretiendo. 4.2. Habrá hombres mejores que tú en apariencia, dinero, personalidad, fuerza, amando, coraje, cariño, cuerpo, alma, mente, humor, ira, y no será justo. 4.3. Cada derrota debes enfrentarla solo. 4.4. Todo dolerá. No hay un gran amor. 4.5. El contenido de la botella de alcohol y sueños romanceará estas verdades en tu cama de clemencia. 5.1. La botella es sagrada. Lo opuesto a la muerte es el sexo. 5.2. Ama el cuerpo imperfecto. 5.3. Ama el cuerpo que acoge tu abrazo lamentable. 5.4. El sexo es la unión de cuerpos imperfectos, brillante compasión, exhalaciones girando como humo de un fuego azul, la sal de tus dos tierras escurriéndose en la lengua del otro. 6.1. La botella es sagrada. La familia y los amigos hacen los mejores enemigos. 6.2. Pasa la botella a tus descendientes para que ellos también conozcan estas verdades. 6.3. Cuando tus hijos descubren la fuente de tu miseria, olvídalos. Échalos al mar de tus deseos. 6.4. Ellos no te perdonarán. La botella te ayudará a olvidar. 6.5. No puedes arruinar lo que entiendes. 6.6. Recordar es vivir en el pasado. El pasado vive para matar el presente. 7.1. La botella es sagrada y nunca puede morir. Esto no es tu culpa. 7.2. Un cuerpo muerto y un cuerpo durmiendo dejan la misma huella en la tierra. 7.3. Ora para que encuentren tus huesos y sepan quién ganó. 8.1. La botella es sagrada, llena de alcohol y sueños. 8.2. Tu sal no nutrirá la tierra. Man, that was that.
That was hardcore. That's super brave of you. Again, congratulations on your willingness to experiment. That's your own translation. And I think one of the challenges of hearing poetry also is that we're not able to see Reyes's poems on the page, because if you look through his book, you'll see that he's taken each poem and crafted a different look for each poem. Every poem looks different on the page almost. And there's other poems like in La Pulga where you can actually imagine that those text blocks are objects that are lined up on a table and offered for sale. Or the other one that's being stuck in traffic that is like these capsules of text that can be like cars on 2 lanes on a highway. So this is something that the listeners can appreciate, but if you buy the book, you'll see how much art and craft he's taken into what the way that the poems look on the page. Thanks, Reyes.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, what I didn't say in the beginning is thank you Your poetry has definitely inspired me. Matria, I would consider a favorite of mine. And I think you have a lot of series poems in your collection. And that the way you structured your series helped me structure some of the series in this collection. And so there's a lot of series poems. And one of them is a series titled Hijo Please, which plays a lot with English and Spanish and Spanglish. And I think for me, they're definitely inspired by conversations with my mom, because as you can tell, I can speak Spanish, quote unquote, but like it takes a great deal of patience, especially when, my mom doesn't speak English very well. And so here you are, you have these two people, this dude who can barely speak Spanish and this woman who can barely speak English, and we're just, trying to communicate. And so I think these conversations, I think, are inspired a lot in how I navigate language, English and Spanish, and how she navigated English and Spanish. And so I wrote this series of poems to kind of make people be patient with that process as we had to be patient with each other. So hopefully it's a practice in empathy. So I'm going to read 4 poems from the series. So the first one is Hijo Please. Get sassy. Tell her to gather enough change to buy manzanas. Make sure they are green. I want the sourness to overwhelm mi lengua like the weight of el sol on naked skin. Also, bring me mis pastillas. It hurts to be angry, but feels so good to be as pitiful as a perro with whittled teeth and a desesperación to walk on 2 legs. Hijo, marry a Mexicana because the desire for something sweet is natural, and mi gente have understood this desire since they ripped hearts out of chests. Pero ya te conozco. You don't like your family. When I was your age, I was raising my sisters, so I understand. Mírame ya. You give everyone everything, and you're still sola. Hijo, please. Speak to gringos como un perrito, like always starting a love song. Cuando limpias algo for white people, do it like they're giving you un favor, by letting you scrub their floor, fold their clothes, not looking in their eyes from a corner, lo que sea. A veces, they will leave cash algún lado, arriba de un mueble, next to a toy, buy the alcohol, y will check if it's gone. Gringos respect dogs and results. You are a Mexican compromise. Por cierto, whites are an investment. You get what you need from them and their children's children. You see, dices, yes, thank you. Hijo, please, vete a la tienda. Cómprame esas tarjetitas to call your tíos, tus tías. Dísele al señor, señor, quiero tarjetas para llamar mis tíos, mis tías en México. Quick, please. No sales así. Try to look presentable. Have a madre de clothes. Juro, God is a mother. No seas malo. Baila viejita que reza, porfa, something dulce. Qué cruel la vida es. Mijo, tienes que ser buena gente. When you marry, love your wife. Kiss her hands every night antes de dormir. You never know. Ama tu gente. Be kind or Diosito will make you kind. Hijo, please. Entiende que all times is hard. Los malos siempre estarán en charge y los buenos sobreviven. What can you do? If you love God, you surrender what you love most to him. Y si no confías en la justicia, no existe. If justicia is not true, ¿qué estamos haciendo? Esa cara. I hate when you remind me of tu padre. Have some hope. Hazme algo. Promise me que nunca tomarás. Your father, his father, his father, alcohólicos. I know what's wrong with you, but I cannot fix it. It's tu curse. Los dos pueden ser verdad. Él nunca estaba aquí, and you're just like him. Yeah, that's that on that.
That's amazing. I love how the mother keeps stepping into the stage and speaking what's on her mind, because these poems are placed, throughout 4 sections of the book. And so it's almost like she's reading the book alongside us and kind of commenting over your shoulder all of these this kind of ways that her life and your life converge and split, right? And how she leaves these instructions on how to live in this America. And she gives you like origin stories and survival tips, you know, what to do after her death. And it's so hard, right? Because like sometimes honest love is just, it's brutal, right? And what a mother wants is for her child to survive. And it's so hard sometimes to see our parents as humans, as mortals, right? Because at one point these people were like the only shield that we had, you know, between us and the world. So I love that series. It's really great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely like a series, and I'm happy you picked up on that. Yeah, it's like a voice that keeps coming back, and it's just something that I think I'll say that as like even the markation of like, I don't even know if I'm like first generation or second generation or what have you, because I think what is an American, you know, especially someone who holds on, a lot of people in our community like hold on to like the identities of another country, and it's kind of like, well, they're here but they're also not here in a way, like all the way, and I think you have to question like, well, then what am I doing, you know, like and I think it's a good question to ask yourself. And so I think the poems hopefully play with that. They play with that relationship. And so with that in mind, I'm going to read some requests. So there's a poem called Pozole. Examine handsome pork and note the vulnerabilities. The ears blush, the feet's foggy tendons, the ruby pierna's coat of grasa, a lightning of white cartilage. Strip the gummy fat and know what must be made bare. Place them all in la olla with streaks of cold tears, full of agua hirviendo. What is any sabor but a flesh boiled until clouds of loam float to the water screaming surface like souls to rapture? Skim the sputtering espuma. Add ajos, onion, salt, bouillon, whatever may grace throat and stomach with wax-thick broth. A recipe is a litany of what has nourished the history of your becoming. Stir so nothing sinks and sticks. Open latas of white hominy. Hand wash them like spilled teeth, like nascent pearls, like orbs of wisdom from the dead. Continue boiling. Continue waiting. Continue living. Remove what can no longer give. Cebolla, garlic, out. Add bay leaf. Add oregano. Add what cannot be said. Taste this labor. Taste what's been tasted before you. What has provided clarity beyond hunger. What has been prepared to the singing of those who cannot hear your music. By those now in unwakeable sleep. Through your mother's hope. Through the instinct to reach across the time and say, you are here. Is it possible to ever be alone? Yeah, that poem is definitely inspired by, literally like the recipe of how, you know, I was taught to make pozole. And so I think it's always interesting to kind of see what is handed down, what is saved and salvaged. And I think it's interesting that, you know, pozole was, I think it was like innovated or kind of recorded or documented in the like 1300s. And it's just really cool to know that we have knowledge that is, you know, beyond these walls, these nations, these ideas of what we think are true now. And that we just have knowledge that's older than all that combined. And on that note, the next poem is called Pupusas. The pupusa is a portrait of an honest earth. The course burns continents, the auroral dough a sea. Water joined masa through tumult and sphered, flattened then crowned, filled with meat and milk then smooth, heat birthed and bitten. No, the pupusa is an homage to the laborer's backhand, where scars simmer and settle, strawberry skin browns, sweated flash crackles on steaming metal, Grease singing smoke loud then sweet over and over, flipped and rested, an iris weepy then dry, ashen islands form and a back stiffens. No, the pupusa is a documentation of every pecado. The top pink palette, a receipt for indulgence. A sheet of young wood pulp dims, then an emergence of weighty shadows. A sycamore pith rises and splits and spits a globe of queso. No, the pupusa is a bulging mirror to the sleepless face. Examine the wrinkle bowls under each eye and find another tired eye under another tired eye. The cream sol bulges then sombers, sunspots and scabs black. What can this light nourish but a body ripe with eonic exhaustion?
I really love these food poems, and it's hard because you sometimes, being a Salvadoran or Latino writer or Latina writer, you can order what is expected of you, that your poems are going to be about pupusas, but you really enter this in such an interesting way because usually recipe poems have this like feeling of an incantation or a spell or a blessing, and it does have that feeling of an ofrenda. But what I really love is like that you have this like tumbling and weaving of images, and they break also, right? Because like in the pupusa poem, you say, no, a pupusa is a portrait. No, a pupusa is this. No, a pupusa is that. And the sounds of it are amazing too. And that is something when you're making or waiting for a pupusa to be served to you, there is so much, not only in the smells, but in the sounds of the hands hitting the masa on the comal, the sizzling of the cheese and all of that. And you really get a feeling of this idea of food as sacrifice, as body. And I think that you've really moved one level in a different direction from what most would consider to be a pupusa poem,
Yeah, I think that was so I think in general, like obviously food is very important, and I think for me as a poetic exercise, I was like, yeah, let's try it in this way or that way. And for me, like a pupusa, I think is usually seen as like the I forgot what the word is, but it's like it's a stand-in for like, and generally food can be a stand-in for like different ethnicities. And I think for me, it's like I think it can be both. Like it can be that, but I think it's also like, each time someone makes something, it's unique. It's that one thing. And so it's kind of like, how do I explore like the different meanings and different ways that people can interact with this thing? And so for me, it's like I wanted it to be like an argument. It's like, no, it's this, and no, it's that, no, it's this, and I think it's all true. It's all valid. Yeah. So thank you.
I think
So I'll read. Go
commenting
ahead,
on
please.
that. I think that what you're saying about these dualities and this thing that you do of kind of like reassigning new definitions to things, I think it's really interesting how you revisit like certain origin stories, or you give these kind of descriptions on how to live despite or against the rules. There's very much like a feeling of going against the grain in your work.
Thank you. Yeah. It's just I think I feel like I've been told a lot, like how things ought to be, and I usually try to find a way that like proves it wrong. Because to me, I think the one that is more interesting, especially from an artistic and creative viewpoint, but also I think like it's what's most necessary, because right now, things are not going great in the world, and so we need different ideas of the same thing, and we need to talk about them, and we need to explore each thing, one, to give it its full humanity, and two, to reach the best answer we can. And we can only do that if we share each other's perspectives and discuss. And and so for me, I think the art should reflect that. It should reflect like the consideration that one takes of a thing, and from all angles possible, so that, the poet, the writer can say, no, it has to be this way, or this is the only way I could do it. So I think that's just kind of like a responsibility that I think the artist has to take. Yeah, so thank you. I'm gonna do two more poems. I'm gonna throw in a surprise poem. It's called so this one so there are some there's another series of poems that look at historical figures, Latinx historical figure, Mexican American and Salvadoran American. I think one just out of my own curiosity, being Mexican and Salvadoran, and kind of seeing like, well, how do people like me deal with a lot of the stuff that I'm dealing with before me? Interesting historical figure. She's still alive. So her name is Rosemary Casals, who is a Salvadoran American tennis player. And she was, along with like Billy King, who deservedly gets a lot of attention for raising up issues of gender equality in tennis and in sports in general. But Rosemary Casals was actually there too. But I don't feel like her story is told as much. And I think it's kind of like that marginalization that happens in American history. And, hopefully the poem corrects some of that and lets y'all know that, Salvadoran Americans as well contributed to American history. There's also another poem about George Melendez Wright. And there's also a series of poems about the Fabulous Wonder Twins, all really interesting and cool Salvadoran American historical figures. So this next poem is called Answers Without Questions for Rosemary Casals. I had no idols. Think. At a dinner table, a blue bowl reflects your face as a drowning angel. Stomach screams speaking. Do you think about rosemary licked crust of roasted chicken crackling between your teeth and wait for someone to deliver this fantasy? No. You leave and prepare a feast from your ambitions. There's no such thing as strength, just what survives restraint. Why don't you ask a caged motmot about the possibilities of its turquoise wings, the impossibilities of the pendulous black rackets at tail's end? To answer your question, it's my movement and overhead, how I'm seen yet inconceivable, how I smack a ball into its fate, respectively. I can prevaricate with words like dedication, heart, and discipline, but truly, it takes everything. A willingness to be inspected like a crime scene, able to answer someone calmly when they ask if you belong here, the desire to transform the tennis ball into a whirling sun, and being ready for all of it to never be enough. No one memory ever defines a life. That's like seeing one frame to experience a film. When you think about it, death is when an object or moment or person is removed of its story. Sans history and future, a thing is just a thing, an heirloom with no heir. Let me put it this way. I've lost everything, but won everything as well. Really, I'm everything in its loss, the loss and everything's return. If you're about it, you always want to play the best. If I could play against God, then I'd play against God. Not that I'm foolish enough to think I could beat God, but I just want to know how God would play, how potent the serves would be, how the ball would exist outside the bounds of time and space, how even God will respect that what they give, I will return, and what I give, they will accept.
I love it. That super confident voice and the statements. It's really an amazing. It echoes the actual content of like that serving that ball, like bam, and it smacks back and forth.
Yeah, I've watched a lot of her interviews, and she's like, I'm not. She obviously didn't say anything similar to that, but that she has that confidence that I was like, I wanted to kind of replicate that voice as much as possible. There's one interview where they asked her like, who were your idols growing up? And she did, in fact, say, I didn't have any. Like she was just like, I didn't have any. I had to be my own idol, And so I obviously just took that and ran with it. And so she's great, Rosemary Casals. Definitely check her out. I think at one point she was like the highest paid tennis player because she won like I forgot which tournament, but she won like one of the biggest tournaments at the time, and it was like the highest payout in tennis history at the time. So really cool person. Definitely check her out. And so I'll read one more poem. This poem is called A Lesson Towards Dispossession. My father, as a child, witnessed a country's death, aiming down the gas black horizon of a gun longer than a timeline. My father, as a child, carried an M16 or an AK-47 as I would lug a green backpack on an early stroll to school. A child with a gun is the final wall at the end of every imagination. Can you trust a reality that conceived this? I'm not going to say any more about it. My father, as a child, was probably smuggled into Texas in a van or trunk, a discreet seed of desire sown in moonlight. An escape grew into a life. I wouldn't be here otherwise. What am I but a harvest of an American fate? The story is Salvadoreños emerged from corn or from a primordial cave, or who knows, since so many stories have been lost in the deep breath of history. I've been told by nations that Salvadoreños are to be saved from the guns we supposedly hold like paintbrushes in our masterpiece of violence. Does violence flow in every vein of every Salvadoreño? My father, as a child, held a gun. My father, as a man, prepared my escadas. In my hand is there to be a rifle, dark as dirt, with blood in it, aimed at my reflection to shoot for no other purpose than for the shards to rot. Colonization is a pedagogy I master with every envisioning of my destruction. What is the mind but a container of spilled sangre? Pues, no rifle here. What I cannot read, I interpret with ink, a paper, lines between lines, emptiness, the capacity for my language.
That's so strong. Thank you so much for reading that. I know that was a personal request from all of us. Janet, Lucia, I don't know if you want to jump in and make any comments or have any questions for Reyes.
Well, I just found that all of the images that you have in that last poem are so real, so strong, and I can just see it. I can feel it. And it's that lack of understanding, if you will, between the generations. What were my generation was leaving Salvador from all of those guns. I mean, that line on violence, if you could read it again, I mean, it is such it's is so true, and it feels like the knife above the bayonet, you know. There's one stanza there that is just fantastic.
Oh, is it the one that's a question? Is it does violence flow in every vein of every Salvadoreño? My father as a child held a gun. My father as a man prepared mariscadas.
Yeah, I mean, I just think is so wonderful, because I think you are also questioning the way others see us here. You know, are we just violence? Is that what's in our veins, without talking about colonization and what colonization has done to us? And that's one of the reasons why, you know, this poem being read today in Indigenous Peoples Day, El Día de la Raza, really resonates, and I thank you for it. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely there's definitely a series of poems in the collection that are throughout the collection that kind of explore that legacy, that explore you know, what stories are handed down and like experience. And I think and as we see now in regards to like current events, like, you know, a people are usually dispossessed of their story to make it easier, to not have to deal with it, to deal with the consequences or the causes. And so like, in the news, you'll see like, obviously the depictions of Salvadorans as a problematic people that, do horrible things, but it's like, well, no, we're, just like any group of people, we're complex, and we're having to deal with very serious and horrific side effects of things that are still happening in the world. And just like human beings, any other human being, we're dealing it in very complex ways, whether it be through violence or through love, through starting a family and preparing a meal for your family. That's just as important to know and important to show as well. But, like I said, I think there's a grander narrative that, we're having to fight against. And I hope the poetry provides that outlet. And I'm happy to hear that that's how you taken it. So thank you.
Reyes, I have a question too.
Please.
I love Mi Hijo too, number 2. And I just wanted to ask you about it and ask you to talk a little bit around it. Tell me how, I don't know, how it came about, what are your thoughts on that poem? I mean, it's tremendously strong for me.
Which poem? I'm sorry.
Mi Hijo, number 2.
Oh yeah. Let me see. Let me pull that one up. Hijo, please. Yeah. I think growing up, you get different pieces of advice, and you so I think for me, in my particular context, I was born in America. I was born in Houston, Texas. And it's astounding to me that just by virtue of like time and place, I had, more rights than like my parents, right? In a lot of ways. And, it was just purely through circumstance. And I think this poem is kind of like an exploration of like, what do you have to do to survive? Like, and what do you have to accept? What are some truths that you have to deal with? What are some truths you have to navigate? And so for me, like my mom is cleans houses, and so by virtue I also had to clean houses, to help her out growing up. And so I think like exploring like what you have to do, right? You have to clean floors, you have to be essentially a tool, and the more useful of a tool you are to empire, the more you're rewarded. And I think that kind of is a poetic exploration of that sentiment of like, that's what I've been handed down, is like the more of a useful tool you are, the better you'll do in this country, which in a way is true, but also in a lot of ways is not true.
Terrific. Yeah, that's why I talked about the decolonization, and then Jeanette brought it up too, that it's very much in your work, that whole theme, I feel.
Thank you. And I think kind of as the child of immigrants from 2 different diasporas, it's like I start to see some of the same questions, but maybe with different results and with different answers. And just dealing with that with all that.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I think ultimately colonization is forcing an answer onto people, and then us having to ask those questions of like, what is going on? Why are we doing this? And sometimes you don't get to have another answer. Sometimes the answer you get is the one you get. But I think as we progress as a people, as a community, I think we're starting to come up with more answers and ways to explore the questions that we're giving each other.
That's I think what's really interesting is that with that theme, it's a lot of questions too. It's not just about the answers, how you make those questions and what questions they are. I mean, I'm talking about colonization or decolonization, because I'm looking at that a lot here in New York at school. So yeah, I find it a very interesting topic, and I like how you address it in your book. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think there's a question on the Kalina Facebook page. Efra, could you read it? It's in Spanish, and if you need it to be translated, we'll between all of us, we'll translate it. All right, let me see. It's by Víctor Hugo Rivas. Cuando escribes tus poemas, ¿cómo te imaginas que las personas los reciben? Me refiero a este híbrido del uso del lenguaje y referencias culturales específicas en un país como Estados Unidos, donde los últimos años crece la xenofobia. So, Jeanette, help me out here.
Well, when you write your poems, how do you imagine that people respond to them? What I'm referring to is that way in which you use language in a hybrid manner, English and cultural references that are specific, in a country like the US. How is it received? Where he states where in the last few years, racism and xenophobia is really growing.
Pues lo mejor que yo puedo en dar una respuesta en inglés y español. So I'm going to do my best to give an answer in English and Spanish. I would say that I imagine I have to imagine an audience that as a writer, I think people they have a lot of empathy. I think in general, especially people within, the communities that I am in. And so as a poet, as a writer, I have to trust that whatever I put out there, that there's going to be some people that are going to like it. And I've had responses where people don't like it. And they are like, I hate that I have to translate this, or I don't like that I have to be confronted with something I don't know. And I think that's the exact experience that I want. So even if you do know English and Spanish, I think there's some poems in there that I think are going to trip you up either way. So yo pienso que la gente tiene mucha empatía, right? That's empathy, empatía. Y que claro que van a ser gente en mi comunidad que la van a gustar esto, la van a gustar que estoy jugando con inglés y español, y hay gente que lo van a odiar, van a decir, ¿por qué tengo que navegar algo que yo no conozco? Y yo pienso eso es lo que yo quiero. Yo quiero que la gente practica esa empatía en traduciendo en inglés y español. Y yo sé que si conoces inglés y español, si lo sabes, los dos idiomas, vas a tener que hacer algún trabajo en traducir los dos, porque últimamente lo que yo quería es que la gente explora y jugar con la idea de empatía y la poesía. And so what I want people to do is to kind of explore their limits of empathy and language through the poems, because ultimately I think that if you're willing to show patience with what's on the page, then hopefully that can translate into you being patient with the human being. So yo espero que si tienes paciencia con lo que está en la página, que vas a tener y traducir esa paciencia con un humano. Y últimamente es lo que yo quería estos poemas hacer conectado con la humanidad. And ultimately that's what I wanted, is I want the poems to be tied to humanity. And I think that was just the best way I could do it.
I think that's such an amazing and very complex answer, and I think that it's evident in your work. Your work invites people to look a little deeper, to linger, no? And I have a personal question, because I read your Book of Wanderers too. It's a collection of short stories, and I want to know what's it like for you to flip that switch between fiction and poetry, or how do those two worlds live side by side? And then I have a shy person who's on the side asking, what language do you dream in? They don't post, they
I-
didn't post it on Facebook, but they're chatting with me saying, ask him what language he dreams in. So
Good. I don't know if I dream in language. I think I dream in images. Like all of my dreams are like experiences rather than like dialogues or conversations. It's like I used to keep a dream journal that I would go at it, but it's like in another room under a stack or something like that. But I always dream, like, I think a ridiculous dream is like I go see a movie, but the theater is a small hallway, so I have to like lay down on the side, and it gets so hot that I take off all my clothes, and then I get in trouble for that, and so they kick me out, and then I get mad, and then I have to go back the next day because I left my jacket. And so I don't think there's any language exchanged in there. I think they're just sentiments. So yeah, I hope that answers that question. But I think in terms of like playing between, let's say, like writing genres and mediums, for me as a writer, I play with language. Like that ultimately is what I do. I play with language, and I think language encompasses so many different things. It can be short stories, it can be essays, it can be poems, it can be plays, it can be visual language, it can be criticism, it can be either way. These are all different containers for language. And so I think as a writer, that's what I should do. I should play with the containers of language and language itself. I don't have to be, to me, I think it's actually way more limiting to be only in one genre or one thing. Because for example, the responsibilities of a sentence is different than the responsibility of a line, right? So like in poetry, you can have a poem full of sentences, but you don't have to. Whereas in a short story, you pretty much have to stick to the sentence, right? Because that's how we tell a narrative and story. And so what does that do for you? What does that unlock? And so for me, fiction and short stories let me play with the truth. Poetry lets me explore the truth. And then I write essays as well, and essays let me deconstruct the truth. And so those all different things like interact differently with each other. And so, yeah, I think poetry is just something that doesn't have to play with the normal conventions of language. So it's older than fiction in a lot of ways. It's older than short stories. So it doesn't have the same conceptions of what it should be. Whereas short stories, I think, are more a recent thing in the human imagination. So you have more rules that you have to live by and play with. But that's the thing; they're not set in stone. So for me, fiction is, I think I play more with genre in fiction, whereas in poetry, I play with language more so. But I think there's always different levels of different things. Like, for example, I think you could write a whole poem just with questions, but I don't think you could write a whole story with just questions. You could, but it'd probably be way more difficult to get through as a reader. And so I think that's also like another thing to explore, is the limitations of each thing. I don't know, like I'm writing an essay that explores the depictions of the help in film, in American film. Can I do that in poetry? Sure, but I don't think I get to show my math, right, so to speak. Like I don't think I get to show like, oh, in this film, in this scene, this happens. I don't know if you could probably do it in poetry, but it probably wouldn't be as artful or wouldn't be as poetic.
that's fascinating. I love the idea of containers. I think it was Eduardo Corral in one craft talk that he gave, that he talked about that idea of finding the right form, and how you have to pour your words into different vessels. And that image has totally stayed with me. And I think that, that playfulness with form is also evident in your poetry, as I said in the beginning, because each one looks different from the next page. And so there's you're very conscious of how you're projecting something. And I was going to ask you also, so you also work a lot in art and in art related projects. What are you currently working on right now? We have
Yeah.
about 4 minutes, so I think maybe that if anybody else has any other questions, maybe we can slip those in, but we're going to be wrapping up in a little bit.
Thank you. Yeah. So first of all, let me say that Eduardo C. Correa was actually super influential on this book. He actually helped me. He did like a mentorship program like a few years ago, and he like accepted applications, and he took mine. He actually helped like an early draft of El Rey of Gold Teeth, and that he gave me that exact advice, like to put your poems in different containers just to see what happens. And yeah, like a lot of the poems, as you mentioned earlier, like La Pulga which is a poem entirely, which I wrote as like a layout of a pulga, right? And so you're allowed to jump around and do what you want. I couldn't imagine it. I mean, I think at one point it was just like a normal poem, but I'm like, yeah, like let's put in the container of like what it's trying to do. So shout out to him. And then the second part is like, so yeah, I play with some curatorial practice, which I think is again earlier tied to like visual language and like what is how do you tell a narrative, or how do you tell a theme, or how do you have a prevailing sense of emotion in something that is not language, right? And so I think I'm always jealous of painters and sculptors who don't have to have words. They can just use colors, which I think is amazing, in mediums. I'm too impatient, and I'm really bad at painting, so I'm always jealous, and so I channeled that jealousy into curating. And so I have a project called The Houston Artist Speaks Through Grids, which is I just noticed in Houston a lot of artists use grids in their artwork, and some of these artists don't even know each other, or they're in different scenes, or they're doing different things, and I just put them all together, and I put them with like historical documents, and to kind of show this idea that we're all living in grids, because that's what a city is, whether it be electrical grid or urban planning blocks, all that stuff. And so what do you do with that, right? What do you do with something so utilitarian, and how do you express a life through that? And so you can check it out, thastg.com. It's in both English and Spanish. It's a virtual exhibition. And you'll see a lot of cool artists from Houston and documents. And there's also a side project going on with that called the Pylon Project. So if you don't know what pylons are, they might be just like a really American thing, but like pylons are like, you know how there's like a shopping center, and there's like a lot of businesses in that shopping center that have a big sign that tells you all the businesses in that shopping center, right? So those are called pylons. And in Houston, there's no zoning laws. So you can have like an emergency hospital next to a bakery, next to a gun store. Like we do not care in Houston. And so I recently commissioned artists and writers to explore the pylons in their neighborhoods. And so that'll be coming out soon. So go to thastg.com to find out updates on that, and yeah, all that good stuff.
The link is up on the Facebook comments so that you can check it out. It sounds really interesting.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess before we go, and if there's any other questions, I just want to say again, it's been an honor to be in this space with y'all. The love, I'm astounded by the love that y'all have given me. And writing, I never expected it to give me anything, but it's given me so much, and it includes giving me presence and time with y'all. So thank you so much. Thank you for your words.
It's been a wonderful opportunity, really, here to get to talk to you. And I know that we've seen each other in the periphery, and now really to have this opportunity to hear you read and to talk about your other projects. It's really it's something that fills me with a lot of pride, and I'm sure Janet also, right? Part of her incentive to promote Salvadorans in all of the cultural aspects that we're working in, and for Salvadorans here in El Salvador also to learn about your work, and maybe you can come visit someday and get to visit some artist studios, and that we'd love to host you. So you have a home here with us in El Salvador.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I appreciate that so much. Thank you. I can't say thank you enough times. Thank you. Gracias.
Gracias a ti. Gracias a ti. Ha sido un verdadero placer. Thank you so much. And we love your book.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, have a good night. This event will be recorded on Facebook, and it will also be available on the YouTube channel of La Casa de Cultura, both on Kalina's page and La Casa de Cultura on Facebook. Good night, everybody.